Soul Tribe, to David Berry's 75's channel, and I'm your guest reader, Tony. And if you'd like to guest read, definitely give David send him an email, or you can catch him on Discord, so that and let him know that you would like to read a book and enlighten us all. So let's go ahead and get started with chapter 3. The origin of physical life. Mighty oaks from little acorns grow. When we speak of the genesis of life, we must be understood to mean the origin of physical life, and not the genesis of life within the divine super celestial sphere of God's infinite creation. Man, his constitution, from whence he came and whither his cyclic journey will carry him, is all that embodied man can hope to understand during his sojourn upon the external planes of matter. The exalted adept craves no more. In fact, he cannot obtain any absolute knowledge beyond this, because it is impossible for him to realize anything beyond himself. The perfect man, while incarnated within the astral vortices of humanity, cannot penetrate and know the details of the truth belonging to the purely angelic state. Before he can do this, he must be forever translated from the astral sphere of the planet which gave him birth, and he himself become the angel, the mightiest hierophant, Hermes Trismegistus, this world has ever produced, has only been able to speculate as to details within these exalted states, and such speculations without collaborative testimony are as valueless when used as the foundation for a system of thought as the speculations of any religious enthusiast. The only difference between the two consists in the different planes occupied by the receptive speculators. The involution of spirit and the reactive evolution of matter are based upon the absolute laws, which man may realize for himself, that one form disappears only to give place to another more perfect, and a fact observed throughout nature in all her departments. And those who possess the attributes of soul sight in a sufficiently developed state can perceive the hidden potentialities latent within the outward form. This being so, and we assert of our own spiritual experiences that it is true, then we know that previous to this evolution, which we can distinguish taking place all around us, there must have been a process of involution by which these latent potentialities became involved within external matter. From nothing can be produced. It is therefore only the blind, unreasoning atheist who can credit such an illogical creed as the one which has been thus summarized. From nothing we came, and whatever our station, to nothing we owe an immense obligation. Whatever we do or whatever we learn, in time we shall all into nothing return. To the cold, heartless supporter of this soul annihilation system of nothingness, whose flaunts his superficial learned authority under the plausible name of agnostic, we reply with the fully realized consciousness of a deathless, progressive immortality from an infinite source midst realms of light, an offspring from God. My soul took its flight to gain amidst matter. with its trials and pain, the knowledge to carry it homeward again. The immutable law of nature may be traced backward into remote eras of sun formation, or carried forward beyond the purview of the present into the equally dim vistas of the eternal future, by those who can see and realize for themselves the planes of both cause and effect. To be able to do this, we must attain unto the soul state of equilibrium, where both realms unite, where there is neither cause nor effect, but where the two are one. It is from such a state that the teachings contained in this work were derived, and as such we desire them to be closely studied. The genesis of life must be viewed from the 7 planes of its manifestation to be thoroughly understood. These planes, taken in the order of their cyclic evolution, are as follow: 1 celestial, 2 spiritual, 3 astral, 4 mineral, 5 vegetable, 6 animal, 7 human. From the 7th or human state, the life atom again passes through the astral and spiritual to the celestial. The complete cycle of necessity, being composed of 10 great cycles, corresponds to the well-known Kabbalistic Sephiroth. At present, we shall only speak of 1, 4, and 5. These 3 constituting the foundation from which the others arise. 1. The celestial state. Of this state, it is impossible to give more a general outline containing, as it does, the mystery of those inconceivable laws, by the operation which the ego becomes a self-acting entity. It must suffice to say that it is this state of celestial life where then is located the purely embryonic center in the divine arc of progressive being. This is the point where the diffusive intelligence of the infinite spirit becomes differentiated and atomic. Yes, we repeat the word. The divine ego of the human soul is absolutely atomic. It is a self-existing absolute atom of Jehovah God, a Christ child, which is the impossible to alter, transform, absorb, or annihilate from the supreme moment of its differentiation. It is as eternal and immortal as the infinite, of which it forms a part. But through atomic, it is only so as a purely spiritual conception, a point of radiant light, free from the matter, and incapable of uniting itself with it except by means of reflection. The process of differentiation now claims our attention. This process is consummated within the celestial matrix of angelic parents. By angelic parents, we mean those divine entities who dwell within the various spheres of petrified and angelhood. Note, we do not use the term angel in the sense implied by the ordinary lexicographers who interpret the word as a spirit, servant, or messenger, but we use it to mean the highest and most interior state of life, which is possible for immortal mind to grasp. It is infinitely above that so-called spiritual sphere. The twin souls, male and female, or heavenly Osiris and Isis, father and mother, form 2 halves, the masculine and the feminine attributes of divine ego. They have their altered cycles of activity and repose. During the cycle of their fruitful activity, the 2 natures respond with intense vibrations to the divine anthem of creation, which creates an influx of the formless, motionless spirit into the celestial sensorium, until the whole sphere becomes radiant with the scintillations of spiritual harmony, obeying the creative impulse. These streams of spiritual force flow along the convergent poles from the various centers of the sphere, each force from the male being met and balanced by that of the female, the contact producing by the exact equilibrium of the masculine and feminine natures, the living external spark of immortal life. In other words, these angelic vibrations transform the formless intelligence, which has been indrawn into active eternal egos, as man on earth is the natural outcome of the procreative powers of earthly parents. So the divine activity of the ego are the spiritual results, in one sense, of the creative attributes of angelic progenitors in the celestial worlds. But we must not be misunderstood. Upon this point, the ego is not created in the angelic state. It is only differentiated. The ego never had an actual genesis. It is coeval with deity. The celestial harmony or vibrations merely endowed it with spiritual activity, aroused it from its unconscious state, and propelled it forward with the motion of eternal life. These newly differentiated atoms remain within the paternal soul sphere until the vibrations have ceased. They then become attracted to the reactive energy and are withdrawn from their celestial matrix and carried by the spiritual currents to the embryonic state of the seraphs. Their next descent is to the paradisical worlds of the cherubs, where the bisexual ego becomes the Adam and Eve of Scripture. In the process of time, these pure twin souls unconsciously obey the internal impulse of their evolutionary tempter, become attracted towards matter. Up to this point, they are pure and innocent, knowing neither good nor evil. Therefore, the divine ego, which is incapable of descent into matter, projects the two souls outward as spiritual monads into the vortex of cosmic evolution, where they become separated and ultimately incarnated within the mineral round of a planet, which is the lowest point in the arc. And making this descent, each monad passes through every state in the soul world, then through each of the four realms of the astral kingdom before it appears in the eternal mineral plane. In this state, they constitute the hidden fire of matter, latent force, and atomic energy. Or the mineral state. Having arrived at the mineral state, we must now ascertain the origins of its motion, its life, since we know that within the mineral lies concealed the potencies of an immortal being. In the chapter upon the evolution of matter and the law of crystallization, we endeavor to show that forces, all balanced, produce crystals, and their production, motion, comes to an end. Now, to help us in our search for physical life, let us again press into service our six equal forces, our cubic atom, and let us imagine that one of its forces is not equal to its opposite. For example, the two are not balanced. Say one is less, and that it is the force coming from before. It is evident that the point will move forward in a straight line, and the weaker the force coming from the front, the greater will be the velocity of this movement forward. Now, if this force coming from the front be a mite less than its opposite, its motion will be infinitely slow. Now, let us assume that 2 of the 6 forces are less than their opposites. Say the one from the front and the one from the left. It is evident that we should have motion in a curve, but inasmuch as all the others are the same as when we assumed our point, it is plain that this motion in a curve will be in the same plane of surface and will, in time, describe a circle. But let us assume also that another force is less than its opposite. Say the one coming from above, what we have now, our original point with 3 of its forces less than their opposites. The result will be motion, not motion in a straight line, but in a curve, but not a curve in the same plane of space. And hence, it can never describe a circle, but will form a spiral. A spiral is life. This is to say, it is the motion of life. Just keep clear in your mind that if 1/2 of the primitive forces that make an impenetrable point are less than their opposites, and you have the essential idea of a life force. Chemical force is death. That is balanced, still, and motionless. The spiral motion is the type of life. It is the motion of life. It is the spiritual screw with all the mechanical advantages of a screw in penetrating the universe of matter. The spiral varies in magnitude from the infinitely great to the infinitesimally small. Conceive the lesser force to be but an infinite fraction less than their opposites. Then the spiral will be almost infinite in its sweep of curve and will require almost an eternity to reach its culminating point. On the contrary, the greater the diversity in power, the less will become the curve, until we have the infinitesimally small spiral that will culminate almost instantly. Thus, between these 2 extremes, we have every phenomenon of life, from that of the tiniest insect to the great cosmic life of an astral universe. 5. The vegetable state. Since we have found that motion is the life of matter, we must now seek for a still higher form, the immediate product of matter. We therefore ask the student to mentally bridge the distance between the formation of a crystallized atom to the evolution of a planet with its gaseous envelopes, called its atmosphere. This done, will carefully notice the evolution of the first rudimentary form of vegetable life, from which primal forms all the infinite variety of the vegetable kingdom are evolved, have made the assertion that the spiral is the motion of life. It will be as well to see if the vegetable kingdom will substantiate our assertion as some sort of external evidence. Then let us call to our aid the phyllotaxy of plants, as it is technically termed, on the stems of plants, and the leaves are so placed that a line wound around the stem and touching the petole of each leaf would be a spiral. Where the leaves are in 2 rows, the space between 2 opposite leaves is just half a circle of circumference of the stem, and where there are 3 rows, it is 1/3 of the circumference, and so on to a regular successive series. It's different plants which express the ratio of 1 to 2, 2 to 5, 3 to 8, 5 to 13, 2 to 21, 13 to 34, 21 to 55. The external facts demonstrated by botanical science not only confirm our assertion, but also tend to show the vital force is subject to measurement in the plant. In order to understand how the vegetable evolves from the mineral, not only must the spiral motion of life be held in view, but the various changes of atomic polarity must be clearly apprehended, as for instance, the atom of oxygen and hydrogen by a certain combination produces water. In this union, both become polarized and form a substance which is the polar opposite of their original inflammable states. From this change of polarity, we have clouds, oceans, and rivers. When the vapor from these waters is drawn upward by the heat of the sun, an infinitely small fraction becomes decomposed into a gaseous state. Although decomposed, the atoms are actually the same as they were previously. After combining in the substance known as water, they have only received a different angle of motion, where before they rotated in a circle, they now ascend and resolve in the form of a spiral. In this ascension from Earth, they attract or are attracted by the atoms of carbonic acid gas, and instantly a violent rotation among the various atoms is produced. They combine they combine. No other transformation has taken place. A new thing has been produced. For example, a molecule or germ of physical life under the control of a central atom of fire, the predominating force being oxygen and carbon. This union produces another change of polarity, and they become reattracted to the earth. Here, water or moisture receives them, and as a species of vegetable slime is the physical result. When this vegetable product has served its purpose and decays, it liberates atoms arise in their spiral and in turn become attracted or themselves attracted. Someone or more of the atoms of the air with which they have a natural affinity. The same process of polarization is repeated in some slight variation. And a still higher germ of life is evolved. For example, the lowest form of a lichen. From the liberated atom of the lichen spring forth still higher types of the same family until the climax is attained, when by a higher and more ethereal attraction, the polarized germ bring forth the next higher form of vegetable life. Thus, as the ages roll on from the original, form develop species, classes, and families of vegetation, and from these evolve through the medium of water a still higher round in the gamut of being: insect, reptile, animal, and lastly man. After ages of development, we have man of today. Space will not admit or of our going into further details of this exceedingly interested subject. Volumes might be filled in recounting the writer's personal experience in this department of life, watching with intense interest the weird but beautiful transformations of nature. Much that has left unnoticed here should be made the subject of the student's private meditation and personal research. All right, chapter 4, The Mysteries of Sex. It has been well said by an eminent occultist. Man is most ignorant of those things which are most manifest. In some departments of nature, this is true, and probably in no other manifested department of his being is this truth more strikingly apparent than in that which relates to his sexual nature. He is aware that animal nature is divided into two great classes, male and female. But he knows almost nothing of the spiritual principles which underlie the physical expression of sex. He is fully aware that the union of the two organisms is necessary for the purpose of procreation, but he is fearfully ignorant of those interior processes which produce the actual germ of life. He is more or less adequate with the fact that the lower stratus of animated existence, bisexual organisms, are the general rule, and that occasionally this bisexual nature becomes manifested among men, as seen in the hermaphrodite. But he is quite at a loss to account for such monstrous productions. Hence, it may be truly said that man is most ignorant of things which are most manifest. Therefore, in order to enable the general reader to clearly grasp the various connecting links in the mystical ramifications of sex, to see their perfect harmony, and to understand their relation to each other, we will first speak of the origin of sex. Secondly, described as clearly as possible its nature and function. Thirdly, point out the relation of sexes to each other. And lastly, present a brief application of the whole as it relates to man, the universe, and the immortality of the soul. 1. The origin of sex. Deity is a unity that expresses or manifests itself as duality. This is the eternal trinity of life, the infinite ocean of formless spirit within its latent bosom contains all that is, was, or ever can be. Therefore, it contains all the elements of sex and their primal state. When the first pulsation of that thought, which evolved the divine idea, became manifest, nature arrayed herself under the two modes of motion, action and reaction. The in-breath and out-breath of this divine thought in the earliest dawn of creation thus instituted the first spiritual attributes of sex. Each function of the deific soul, which was designated as inspiration and respiration, or action and reaction of the universal life, current, thus became differentiated for all eternity as the primary fundamental principle of manifested being. The Kabbalistic initiates of the ages that are gone formulated this same being, spirit of love and wisdom. Love as the negative or female ray in content and ever seek to unfold. Wisdom as the positive masculine ray is restless and always in pursuit. The female forces are ever striving to encircle the atom, and the masculine forces striving to propel it in a straight line. From this dual action of the spiritual potentialities is born the spiral, the motion of life, the symbol of eternal progression. We cannot attempt any explanation of how the first deific forms of sexual life became ultimated, nor the why and wherefore of this celestial existence. It is enough for us that we are enabled by the laws of correspondence to trace the origins of sex to the shores of the great foundation of all existence, and to proclaim it in the world as the first principle of that great central ego, God, from which all manifested egos derive their being. In order that we may comprehend somewhat of the mysteries of sex as we see them manifested in humanity, we must descend from these particularly inconceivable heights of celestial glory and seek for the links of their continuous chain within the highest state of life approachable by the embodied human soul. For example, the angelic sphere of the soul world. Only in these states can we obtain any definite idea of the interior significance of sex. It is mighty important as a factor in the immortality of the human soul. The first link of the celestial chain, as we have seen, lies concealed within the bosom of the Infinite One. What the succeeding one may contain, we cannot tell, but they will bear a perfect correspondence to the angelic state, we are certain, making due allowance for the difference for the respective state. Therefore, since we know the origin of sex, we will consider its correlated, which has been designated as inspiration and respiration. 2. Sex is nature and functions. In the previous chapter, we have described in a very brief manner the actual differentiation of the human ego as a deific atom of life. We need not, therefore, repeat any of the descriptions there given, but we will add that it must be a self-evident fact that the ego contains within itself all the primary elements of sex in a latent condition. These attributes have not as yet been subjected to the requisite conditions for their evolution. In this state, then, there is neither love nor wisdom manifested within the ego. It cannot know happiness when it is ignorant of sorrow. It cannot form any conception of rest before weariness has approached. There can be no real love for the ego when it has never experienced the various contrary conditions by which love is distinguished. The wisdom of the ego in this state is equally latent, since it possesses no means of arriving at a true knowledge of its various surroundings. In this state, we behold the spiritual atom in its primal condition, where the power of God hath just created it. It is the first spiritual atom. The various series of states through which the divine ego must penetrate in order to evolve its soul sphere are the necessary means by which the internal potentialities of sex must be awakened. When this transpires, the divine ego becomes pregnant with the dual form of its own organic life, and the twin souls are born, the male and the female element of its being, which are represented in Genesis as Adam and Eve, knowing neither good or evil. A beautiful description, this of the embryonic human souls. These twin souls are the absolute expression of the masculine and feminine race of which every absolute atomic ego is composed. The masculine ray contains a portion of the feminine element, or could be reaction of its forces. The feminine ray must likewise contain a portion of the masculine qualities for the same reason. These twin souls contain a portion of each other. They constitute the sun and the moon, so to say, of the ego's creation. And when once they become differentiated, they are as eternal and immortal as the ego which called them into existence. They can be either absorbed nor annihilated by time nor eternity. They constitute the divine idea of their deific parent, and as such, they become the divine expression of love and wisdom upon this earth. Note, the statement requires some slight qualification we mean that no foreign or outside influence can absorb or annihilate the sexual qualities of the soul. It is therefore true that the masculine and feminine attributes of the soul cannot be destroyed as a whole, but the masculine portion may attract its feminine portion of soulmate, and by the intense selfhood of its own dominant forces, virtually destroys her manifested existence. This absorption, however, is a very rare occurrence and only transpires in the case of those magical adepts of the astral plane who have attained their psychological powers by a complete polarization of all the truly human elements of their eternal nature. Sorry, I lost my words. Such magical adepts come the concentrated centers of spiritual selfishness, but teach the external masses that self is the very demon they have conquered. These occult processes have transformed them into sexless beings who are neither human nor divine, and yet they profess to be the guardians of the secret doctrine of the sacred science. In this latter capacity, they have formulated much erroneous philosophy, since they are self-magnetized and self-deluded by their own positive ideas of nature to such an extent that they cannot penetrate beyond their own astral spheres, nor receive any knowledge which elevates the soul to higher views and truer conceptions of God's infinite resources. It is from this magical school of thought that the mankind has received the doctrines which teach that sex is only the appearance of matter and not a spiritual reality, whereas nothing is this mighty universe is so manifest and so eternal as the male and female expressions of the divine soul. These adepts profess to have blended the two, but they have simply polarized the feminine and created a conscious selfhood to the other. It is impossible for the absolute ego, the twin soul, to descend into more outward conditions than the parasitical state. So, in order to attain full development of its internal attributes, its own soul expressed as the male and female elements, each unit is projected outward upon the subjective arc of the great cycle, where, after passing through innumerable spheres and states of life, each finally reaches the polarizing point of creation in the mineral, which is the turning point of its cycle of necessity. From this point, it journeys back again to traverse upon the objective arc until it reaches the climax of material form. We see, therefore, that the nature of sex is to give perfect expression to the grand attributes of deific life, love, and wisdom. That to attain this end, a divine soul of the absolute ego becomes differentiated as male and female, each conscious of itself, each a perfect expression of the positive and negative forces of its being. When once this differentiation is completed, then they exist as the divine idea and the microcosm, and constitutes its universe, even as the myriad creations of space constitutes the divine idea of the deity. This being said, each portion of the dual soul maintains forever the perfect symbol of its eternal qualities, and always gives expression in its outward form to the symbol of its internal nature, like produces like. My bad. All right. The function of the soul is to awaken and round out these qualities and attributes which are latent within. And as we see that there are two sets of soul qualities, one the necessary outcome of the other. We see the harmony and the philosophy of the twin forms of life to express them, both male and female, as we have endeavored to show, possesses the necessary positive qualities for the perfect subjugation of material forces. Hence, it is that when the twin souls are projected on their journey into matter, they travel upon divergent lines along the subjective arcs of the soul's evolution. These lines, if it were possible to measure them, would form two sides of an equilateral triangle with mineral as a base, while the apex would indicate the absolute ego or point projection. Sorry. The return journey between the mineral and man form a similar triangle in reverse, which would indicate the objective arc of the soul's evolution. When both arcs are combined, they represent the mystical seal of King Solomon, the double trinity or six-pointed star. This completes two acts in the grand drama of life. This closing tableau in the first act represents the stationary forces of the crystallized mineral, and the second act of the external conditions of human life. The third and last acts as the human cycle, briefly reviews the whole and the previous two arcs, and evolves another six-pointed star, which represents the higher and lower planes of manifestation. This last act is the transit of the soul through the seven super mundane spheres of disembodied existence from man to the angel. But in its grand outlines, it is also a spiritual trine whose closing tableau represents the reunion of the twin souls, symbolized by St. John as the celestial marriage of the Lamb. Thus, we begin with the one divine monad or ego, and in the course of its expression and of the gradual evolution of its sexual attributes, we see it slowly transform into a trinity. This trinity is the subcycle of its evolution, forms three triangles, which constitutes the symbol of its forces, three times expressed upon the three subcycle of its journey. These three subcycles are the subjective arc of the cycle of unconsciousness, the objective arc or cycle of intelligence, and the ethereal arc or cycle of soul consciousness. The result so far for our present research shows that the origins of sex begins with God, and that the nature of sex is the manifestation of his biune spirit, and it functions are the spiral motion of its evolutionary forces that awaken and round out its latent possibilities. It now becomes our duty to consider the third section of our subject, the relation of the sexes to each other. Part 3. The relations of the sexes to each other. Man and female exist in nature as the representative expression of wisdom and love. Their functions correspond exactly with their sex, and in actual life, it may be truly said that woman is ever the center of love, element of humanity. Her thoughts and desires constitutes the index of her mission on earth. In her, we behold the gentle, yielding love nature, which softens and harmonizes man's positive spiritual spirit of aggression. In her delicate nature, we see the lovely center of maternal care and affection. She is the weaker portion of the dual soul upon the physical plane, but her physical weakness constitutes the greater center of her spiritual strain. As the weaker sex, we may think that her true place is that of subjection to man. But on the contrary, her more delicate forces become her most potent weapon, and instead of being the subject, she ascends the throne of the conqueror. Man becomes a pliable medium in her hands and is led a willing captive by her subtle power of resources. In man, we behold the positive, aggressive Lord of creation, the portion of the soul which becomes the restless explorer of nature, seeking for wisdom. Man's will is electric, penetrating, and disruptive. The will of woman is magnetic, attractive, and formative. Hence, they express the polar opposite of nature's forces. The twin souls are related to each other's primary as brother and sister, and finally as man and wife. In this latter state, their true meeting place is in the plane of embodied humanity. But during the present cycle, very few of these spiritual unions take place. But whenever the two halves of the same divine ego do meet, love is the natural consequence, not the physical sensations produced by the animal magnetism of their sexual natures, but the deep, silent emotions of the soul, the responsive vibrations of their internal natures towards each other, the blissful silence of two souls in perfect rapport within neither careth to speak. This spiritual love is the outcome of their divine relationship. It should never be set aside nor crushed by any worldly consideration. But on the contrary, wherever possible, these pure intuitions of the soul should be obeyed. They cannot deceive nor lead astray, because the soul never makes a mistake when claiming its own. Should circumstances in life or any other material consideration prevent their rightful union, the fact that they have actually met will constitute an invisible connection, a spiritual rapport between them, which no earthly power or device can break. Deep down, within the secret chamber of the heart, the image chamber of the heart, the image of loved one will be treasured, and its continually presence will poison and corrode everything which penetrates towards an ephemeral affection for another. If a female should marry under these circumstances and become the mother of children, it will frequently transpire that the actual germs of spiritual life will be transmitted by this absent one. The external husband only provides the purely physical conditions from the manifestation of the spiritual offspring of the true Lord. The rejected soulmate, the spiritual bridegroom, is the real father, and very often the child born will resemble the image of its true parent. By far, the most important of the various relations of the sexes towards each other is that which pertains to their sexual intercourse. Untold misery, suffering, and crime are born into the world through the sensual depravity of mankind on one hand, and then benighted ignorance of human nature upon the other. We are sorry that such a delicate subject cannot be properly treated in the present work, so we will only add that man and wife should harmonize with each other, both in physical temperament and in magnetic polarity. No marriage union should be thought of where these essential points of comparison are wanting. Neither wealth, fame, nor worldly position can compensate for the lack of natural harmony. Discordant unions are the harbinger of sorrow, crime, and disease. Sexual union between inharmonious souls evolves the seed of every species of wickedness and sexual disorder. It may not become apparent to the producer thereof, but it exists within the spaces of human life, ready to spring into concrete form under the first favorable conditions. Let those who deliberate misuse their sexual nature to satisfy licentious, wicked desires stop in a deadly path. Such thoughts and actions lead to madness and actual death. The purely martial man will prove a continual curse to the cold natured Saturnian woman, and vice versa. This may not be any fault of man or woman, but it is in the discordant polarities of their astral constitutions. The same will hold good between natures of the earthly triplicity and those born under the eerie triplicity. A true knowledge of the science of the stars is necessary to determine conjugal harmony or discord. Now, the various sections of our subject are complete, and it only remains for us to apply the logical outcome of the principles of sex as they affect man, the universe, and the immortality of the soul. As we view the outward form of man and woman, we cannot fail to observe the perfect harmony between the external appearance and the internal cause. Their organisms are the concrete image of the principles concealed within. It would be the extreme height of absurdity for us to believe that a materialized form bears no correspondence to the forces which created it. The form cannot exist without an internal cause, and the internal cause is powerless to produce any external form apart from the reflected image of itself and its functions. Under these circumstances, it must be self-evident that every male organism is the absolute outcome of masculine forces, and every female organism the product of female qualities. Therefore, a male soul cannot be born into the world under the cover of a female form. Neither can a female soul be ushered upon the planes of humanity imprisoned within the masculine body. These are nature's simple facts, which ought to be apparent to every thinking mind. But it seems that such is not the case, for we are seriously informed by certain theosophical writers that during the various incarnations of human souls within the human form, man may incarnate in the form of a woman and vice versa. And we can only say that such unutterable nonsense is almost beneath the notice of any sane mind, and those who make such ridiculous assertions are not only bound to the external plane of appearances, but are completely ignorant of the true light of occult science. It often transpires that we find men who appear to possess true feminine natures and women who seem to be masculine in temperament, but this is not really the case. It is only an appearance caused by the combined influence of prenatal conditions and stellar positions at birth. The Buddhistical conception of man and women rounding out until sex becomes obliterated is probably the most transcendental delusion that ever originated within the Oriental brain. Therefore, we take no further notice of such mystical folly. The human form, as male and female, is the material culmination of nature's sexual expression. Upon this plane, she can go no further For beyond this limit, we stepped within these spaces of ether, where nature continues her wonderful expression of sex in strict harmony with the laws of correspondence to the planes below. While dealing with the forms assumed by man, we must briefly notice those vital secretions which form the physical conditions for reproduction of his kind. The seminal fluids are the most ethereal of all physical secretions and contain the very quintessence of human nature. The sexual organism exists as a factor in procreation. Therefore, the organs have their proper functions and use, or they would not be present. To suddenly and completely suppress their natural functions will do a great deal of physical and spiritual harm, because the reaction will create violent discord within the ethereal constitution. In fact, the complete expression is almost as bad as excessive use of lustful indulgence. It is only one of the two extremes, nothing more. When the sexual organism is evolved above the physical plane of its manifestation, the seminal fluids are absorbed by the magnetic constitution, and the etherealized atom helps to build up the spiritual body of man. But when this is not as these seminal germs, it's not passed off amid the other secretions of the body, live and germinate a swarm of elemental life forms, which robs the organism of a portion of its vitality. To obey the law of nature is the only safe and sure road to evolve the spiritual sense of the soul. And one of these laws is the rightful union of the sexes. Celibacy in itself is not a natural state. It is purely artificial, because it ignores one of the principal elements of our being. Therefore, there is a great spiritual danger in a celibate life, and 9/10 of the mystical manias and spiritual Saturnalia of past history have originated among celibates. It is well to remember that at this present day, as there is some considerable dangers of history repeating itself. Celibacy as a quick means of artificial stimulating and producing certain so-called spiritual powers and mediumistic states is a successful method so far as mere psychological results are concerned, but one that is fraught and terribly dangerous. It is a method that should be discouraged in all cases where the spiritual constitution of the organism is in a negative condition. Under the most favorable circumstance, it is a very questionable practice unless the spiritual nature is sufficiently active to absorb and use the etherealized atom of the seminal fluids, which has become dematerialized by the magnetic activities of the occult training. Any species of forcing the attributes of the soul render their manifestation weak and unhealthy, hence liable to error and delusion. It is upon this basis that we count for the spiritual absurdities of many Oriental mystics, their severe asceticisms. I said that wrong, but oh well. Render the unsuspecting prey of every imaginable species of occult delusion. Celibacy, then, must only take place when the animal nature has been evolved so far upward towards the higher principles that the sexual propensities are susceptible of extending their vibrations to a higher plane of action. In this case, celibacy becomes an absolute necessity of further occult process, where herein we see only more the paradox of truth. Upon one plane, it becomes a delusion, and a snare, but upon the higher plane it contains all the elements of a glorious truth. Consequently, no being, human or divine, can lay down any hard or fast lines to guide the various processes of spiritual development. Each organism requires a system that is particular to itself, each soul a training especially adept to the plane it occupies. From this, it will be seen that nothing more from the general principles of occult training can be given. From such outlines, each must adapt such rules and exercise as are applicable to him, and he learns from self-study and practice. And only those who are themselves spiritually enlightened can see the true state of the soul, and physician-like, scientifically prescribe for its various disorders. When we regard the mystical ramifications of sex as represented in the universal creations of sun, star, moons, and planets, we see these same principles at work throughout every department of their being, even in their shape and the form of their orbit. The suns are masculine and represents the cosmic male spirit. The planets are feminine and consequently become the fruitful womb of progressive life. The moons are neither the one nor the other. They are the conflicting offspring of disturbing forces within the sun and its planets. They are the lowest organic expression of planetary life, and as such represents the state of the hermaphrodite. So both in man and in the universe, the potentialities of sex swing the mighty pendulum of thought and motion. The grand object with the divine ego seeks to realize in the evolution of the man's soul is the complete differentiation of its latent attributes. The soul must become the expression of both its qualities and must express the true nature of the Burgoyne spirit. Hence, male and female evolution is the outcome. Each soul rounds out and completes, so to say, its own section of the ego. And in doing this, it becomes individualized as a complete expression of one ray of the divine idea. Hence, it has a perfect identity with its source. Both male and female complete the whole and are related to each other as Osiris and Isis, brother and sister. Their individuality in the form of their spiritual identity is forever preserved, and their united as well as their separate consciousness becomes an attribute of their glorious immortality. Without sex, there cannot be eternal life, and to absorb or destroy these principles in the human organism brings about a divorce between man and his divinity, and thus robs conscious humanity of its deathless immortality. The mysteries of Isis. The human organism, in its more interior sense, is the mystical uterus of Isis. That is, the human organism is the uterus of nature, ever pregnant with the Holy Ghost, the incarnate soul, which, when the period of gestation is complete, the cycle of evolution shall give birth to the Son of God, whose kingdom is not of this earth but of heaven. This means the soul, which has obtained its immortality, is a son of God, etc., whose future state of being is the boundless realm of the spirit. I and the Father are one, meaning that the human ego is but an atom of the Father. It is not the same idea as the more interior state of adeptship of being at one with God. This at one meant is the mystical atonement of the Christ spirit within the human soul. You are at peace with your spiritual consciousness. These ideas, meditated upon, will reveal unto you the whole mystery of Christ and the Immaculate Conception. The idea of the human organism being the mystical womb of nature, was the cause of the ancient priests of the sanctuary elaborating the magnificent funerals and cremation of the Hindu, the Greek, and Roman rites, the embalming of the Egyptians. It was the most important ceremony of ancient times because the most mystically important and most sublime rite that the soul can pass from matter of spirit or back to the Father's home. From the phallic symbol of ancient sex worship through the dual power of love and hatred, lust and brutality, the same law beholds true. Sex is the great primal law of nature, both visible and invisible, objective and subjective. The power of love and hatred in man are feminine and masculine. The man or woman who cannot love is an inhuman monster. There is nothing human about them except the outward physical form of humanity, which is but the lamb's clothing that ill conceals the ravenous wolf within. True humans that truly love, and in loving let their souls transcend all lower passions. Lust is not love. Lust is the animal or passional appetite with nothing human about it, and woe be to those who love cannot rise above the plane of lust. The deliberate use of so-called checks against conception is a fearful crime and should never, under any circumstances, be resorted to. The vital germ seeds so wasted will not leave you, but like famished vampires, they will germinate within the idyllic soul sphere. Your cruel act has separated the divine spark from them. Only the animal portion remains, and they become spiritual elementaries of their own creation, who, like parasites, will suck your life away. If you are not perfectly confident and certain that your sexual passions are pure and respond only to that of those soul affinity you possess, then at once and forever debar the passions completely and lead a life of celibacy. For the soul cannot evolve healthy psychic powers where the tainted mildew of their lust or their impure life is allowed to remain. If the psychic powers are developed into such a state that they are abnormal and impure, mere spiritual fungi of the soul, more tender than hothouse plants because they are forced and reared under artificial conditions and consequently liable to wither and die upon exposure to the first blighting currents of the astral light, where disastrous results always follow. Read, mark, learn, and inwardly digest these great fundamental truths. This is no mild course for the neophyte who aims at the practical realization of the occult powers of his soul. It is either heaven and the ultimate glories of eternal progression, or it is hell and ruination, with the terrible surroundings of the black magician and almost a certainty of final extinction in the elementary spheres of the soul's worlds. True it is that so-called spiritual gifts do not depend upon moral purity, but the utility of these attributes do. Hence, avoid the curse of irresponsible mediumship. Trust to no controlling spirit guide. Always remains the complete master of your own organism at any cost. Once you submit to hypnosis or any control, it is difficult to free yourself. And the oftener you submit, the weaker you become until you are no longer able to make any decisions for yourself. You have been robbed of all your willpower. You have become a hapless tool and must do as you are told. The modern spiritualistic seance and spiritual circles are often, very often, nothing but steaming hotbeds of vice and spiritual impurities. Not all are such. Far from it, but only the sacred family circle at home with kindred souls who blameless lives of moral purity form an impassable barrier to either elemental or elementary is spiritual intercourse safe. There and there only can spiritualists obtain anything worth knowing or be free from danger. We now approach a most sacred subject and one the most vital to both man and woman because it deals with the fundamental principles of their being and explains how, through the magical attractions of human passions, they may become the unconscious instruments of untold evil by launching upon an already over-suffering humanity cruel monsters in human form. There are many spiritualistic teachers who assert that nothing exists in nature but the human, but God forbid that we should accept as humans that which is yet animal. The occultist cannot afford time to moralize upon the mysterious law of nature. He knows that such law exists and that alone concerns him. The teacher's conception of that which constitutes good and evil, mortality and immortality, is not the standard the occultist can accept for one moment. In the first place, it must be understood that the offspring of the average of human beings under average conditions will be quite human and more or less intellectually according to the accidental conditions that surround their prenatal state. The parents of small spirituality and under the dominant influence of the animal passions are to be concerned at below the average of mankind. It is chiefly of this class we shall speak. In the second place, it must be known that there are vast realms of races of beings existing in, on, and around our planet who are invisible to most people. These beings are neither elementary nor elemental spirits, but aerial beings possessing a very powerful affinity to man. There are 7 grades of them corresponding with the 7 planetary states, and consequently corresponding with the 7 great divisions of the human race. It is this class of being that can and do become incarnated in the human organism, the class of persons who must frequently are the means of incarnation. These beings are those of large animal propensities and small spirituality. The conditions are generally sex intercourse, when the male is in a state of intoxication, or both may be. When thus inflamed with drink, lust, and other vile passions and thoughts, there is no possible chance for anything human. When conception takes place under these conditions, an inhuman soul is the result. It is from such union as these that the inhuman Neros and Nana Shahibs of history originate. Remember that social position or artificial education cannot alter the natural result. People of these class are numerous, from the highest to the lowest, and dope addictions are under the same law and penalty. The second class of individually who may be the means of such incarnations are nervous, sensitive people who are actually obsessed by elementaries during sexual union, because by this obsession the elementaries seem to realize and enjoy the excitement of their lustful passions. In all such case, inhuman incarnations is the result. Should conception take place under these conditions, the only remedy these people have is to obtain completely or prevent by the moral purity of their lives the possibility of elementary obsession. And lastly, a woman may, during the period of gestation, magnetically attach an evil being to her otherwise human child, who will possess it completely during life and doubtless lead it to the scaffold or asylum. This magnetic attachment is caused by some but an extreme exercise of her passion. Sorry. Enough has now been said to enable the thoughtful student to see the great mysteries of sex completely. He now knows the use and abuse of sex, understands how to become the parent of good, noble, intellectual human souls for his family, and how to avoid causing the production of monsters. Continuing the same law, we now leave the physical and enter the spiritual and magnetic states. A being in defined sex still remains the supreme law. The same principle which manifests itself as parental instincts and ferocious passions in the animal, and as affection and lust, jealousy and hatred in the human, blooms out into its own pure state in the angelic or celestial conditions as love and wisdom. And this most interior state it attributes in all exterior states of angelic or spiritual existence or institutions and reasons, the feminine and masculine qualities of each human soul. Magnetism is two kinds. For example, animal and mineral, and each kind is dual and male and female, positive and negative. It is the astral fluid containing the properties of the body with which it is connected. Hence, sex always predominates the very soul force of nature, because it is through the agency of their astral fluid that all the various phenomena are produced. It is the actual cause of every effect in both the material and spiritual plane of existence. This force is the indispensable agent of every adept magician or mesmerizer, and the cause of all magnetic and occult phenomena. It pervades every atom of the vast universe, and all of life, including planets and stars, are the subject to this double law of sex, action, and repose. Just as night rests humanity from a day's activity, does the force restore the equilibrium of the spiritual and cosmic planes of nature. The magnetic and astral fluid is the androgen or bisexual, exactly like the human soul, because equilibrium is but the result of two forces, eternal, reacting upon each other. This is life. When these two forces expand, they remain as long inactive as to equal each other and come to complete rest. The condition is death. The same soul force is the hand of the expert magician, has control over life and death. For if the magician wills a thing and his will is sufficiently strong, that thing is done. This is the positive action. Mediumship is the reverse, the negative or passive. It is the feminine which receives. Now we come to the last mystery of the creative eros. It is the climax of the potential powers of sex and embraces all the previous teachings in the recognition of the human organism as the grand mystical uterus of nature. It is the sacred yoni of the glorious Isis, the universal mother. It is the mystery that explains the immaculate conception of Christ child or divine human within us. It is the immortal soul begotten of the Father, enclosed or incarnated in the flesh, the human organism, the virgin womb which shall give birth to the immortal Son of God. When the period of gestation, human incarnation in or on this material plane is complete, this period of gestation is, of course, the great cycle of necessity. For except ye be born again, ye cannot enter the kingdom of heaven. Certainly not. The human soul, while incarnated in the physical organism, is within the womb of nature, and it is only when its full time has elapsed and it has gained its immortality, that it is reborn into the realm of spirit. It has burst the bonds of flesh and blood, escaped from its mother's womb and uterus of nature, and it's free again. And now, dear reader, that we have finished our chapter on sex, we can spare the time to close the book and calmly, quietly, seriously contemplate at what sex really means. Let your soul rise as high as possible in pure, holy thought, thinking only of the mysteries of something in life which is able to develop beautiful, fragrant flowers, delicious, luscious fruit, and nourishing grain foods, all from tiny seeds placed in the ground. How this is accomplished is far beyond our understanding, yet men and women are high above the products of the soil, the birds, the fish, and the animal kingdom. We have freedom of thought and action and should keep out of the mire. If we honestly desire the good, noble thing of life, we can live as we think and thus help to make the glorious heaven here on earth a real, sincere, friendly brotherhood of men and women, free of greedy, selfish, and immoral strife and ill will towards each other. Will not try for it. Truly, this is the eternal prayer of all uptight men and women to have peace and harmony here on earth. Right, in chapter 3 and 4, we'll pick up on section 2, the transition of life. That'll be chapter 1. And yes, I see you. And that ends it for today. And if you'd like to be a guest reader on David Barry's channel, please either contact him by email or contact him on Discord, and let him know that you'd like to share your voice for a book. All right, until next time, you guys have a great day. Peace.